I was standing in my backyard when I saw Patricia Henderson marching across my lawn with 3 other HOA board members trailing behind her like ducklings following their mother. And I knew immediately that my Friday afternoon was about to get ruined. Patricia was the president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association in Gilbert, Arizona. And she had that particular expression on her face that middle-aged women get when they are about to make your life miserable, while insisting they are just following the rules. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it probably gave her a headache, and she clutched a leather folder against her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Mr. Thornton," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "we need to discuss your structure." I set down the wrench I had been using to tighten a bolt on my radio tower and wiped my hands on my jeans. The tower stood 30 feet tall in my backyard, a lattice of galvanized steel that I had spent the better part of 2 weekends assembling. At the top sat my ham radio antenna, along with something else that apparently nobody had bothered to notice until now. "Patricia," I said, keeping my voice level, "what can I do for you?" She stopped about 10 feet away, maintaining what she probably thought was a power position. The other board members, 2 men and a woman I vaguely recognized from neighborhood functions, hung back like they were not entirely sure they wanted to be part of this confrontation. "This tower," Patricia said, gesturing at it with one manicured hand, "it is not approved. We have no record of you submitting an architectural modification request to the HOA board." I took a deep breath. I had known this conversation was coming eventually, though I had hoped to avoid it a bit longer. "I did submit a request 3 months ago. I never heard back." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "We have no record of that." "I have the certified mail receipt that says otherwise," I replied, "which means either you lost it or you ignored it. Either way, I followed the proper procedures." One of the men behind Patricia, a guy named Robert something who I think worked in real estate, cleared his throat. "Even so, structures over 15 feet require board approval, which you definitely do not have." "I do have approval," I said, "just not from you." Patricia's face flushed red. "The HOA governs all external modifications to properties in this subdivision. You cannot just build whatever you want." I walked over to my patio table where I had left my phone and pulled up a saved email. "I have city permits. Building inspector signed off on everything. The structure is completely legal according to Gilbert Municipal Code." "That is not the point," Patricia snapped. "The HOA covenants supersede city regulations when it comes to aesthetic standards. This tower is an eyesore and it has to come down." I looked up at my tower, which was actually pretty nice as far as amateur radio installations went. I had painted it to match the trim on my house, and I had positioned it in the back corner of my yard, where it was barely visible from the street. The only reason Patricia probably even knew about it was because her house backed up to mine 3 lots over. "No," I said simply. Patricia's mouth fell open like I had just slapped her. "Excuse me," I said. "No. The tower stays. I have all the proper legal permits, and I need it for emergency communications. I am a volunteer with the Arizona Emergency Communications Network." This was true. I had been a licensed ham radio operator for 15 years, and I volunteered with a group that provided backup communications for the county during emergencies. We had been activated twice in the past 3 years, once for a wildfire evacuation, and once when severe storms knocked out cell towers. "I do not care if you are communicating with aliens," Patricia said, her voice rising. "You are in violation of HOA regulations, and you will remove this structure, or we will take legal action." The woman standing behind Patricia, whose name I thought might be Sandra, spoke up. "Maybe we could reach some kind of compromise. Could you make it shorter, maybe? I shook my head. The height is necessary for the antenna to function properly, and there is another issue you all seem to have missed. What issue? Robert asked. I pointed to a small cylindrical device mounted about halfway up the tower. See that? That is a water pressure sensor. It connects to the monitoring system for the water district. This tower is not just for my radio. It is part of the city infrastructure. Patricia stared at me. What are you talking about? When I got my building permits, a guy from the Gilbert Water Department contacted me. They needed a location for a monitoring station in this area, and my tower was perfect. They installed their equipment, and in exchange, they helped offset some of my construction costs. It is all documented with the city. This was not something I had planned initially, but when the water department had reached out, it seemed like a win-win situation. They got a convenient mounting point for their sensors, and I got help paying for the tower construction. Patricia's face had gone from red to purple. You cannot just put city equipment on your property without HOA approval. Actually, I can. City infrastructure is exempt from HOA regulations. It is in the Arizona revised statutes. You can look it up. We will see about that, Patricia said, spinning on her heel. You will be hearing from our attorney. She stormed off, her entourage following. I watched them go, then looked back up at my tower. I had a sinking feeling this was going to get worse before it got better. I was right. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter from a law firm in Scottsdale. The letter, which ran to 4 pages of dense legalese, informed me that I was in violation of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA covenants and demanded that I remove the tower within 30 days or face fines of $100 per day, plus legal fees. I called my buddy Marcus, who was a lawyer, though his specialty was corporate contracts, not HOA disputes. This is aggressive, Marcus said, scanning through the letter I had forwarded to him. Have you talked to the water department about this? I called them yesterday, I said. They are checking with their legal department. The guy I spoke with seemed pretty surprised that the HOA was making an issue of it. HOAs can be tricky, Marcus said. They have a lot of power to enforce their covenants, but if the city has equipment on your tower, that changes things. Let me make some calls. While Marcus did his research, I decided to take a different approach. I went to the next HOA board meeting, which was held in the community center on a Tuesday evening. About 20 homeowners were there, most looking bored as Patricia droned through the minutes from the last meeting. When we got to new business, I raised my hand. Patricia looked at me like I was something unpleasant she had found on the bottom of her shoe. Yes, Mr. Thornton. I stood up. I want to address the issue with my radio tower. I think there has been some confusion about what it is and why it is there. There is no confusion, Patricia said. You built an unapproved structure. I submitted a request for approval 3 months before I started construction. I have proof of that. But beyond that, the tower now serves as a mounting point for city water monitoring equipment. Removing it would interfere with municipal infrastructure. A man I did not recognize spoke up from the back. What kind of monitoring? Water pressure sensors, I explained. They help the water district track flow and pressure throughout the system. It is part of how they detect leaks and maintain service quality. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. That is not our concern. The structure violates our aesthetic standards and it has to go. Even if removing it would disrupt water service monitoring, I asked. The city can find somewhere else to put their equipment, Patricia said. Our primary responsibility is maintaining property values in this community, and your tower is negatively impacting those values. Has anyone actually complained about it? I asked. Other than you, Patricia's face flushed. That is irrelevant. A woman sitting in the front row turned around to look at me. Where exactly is this tower? I do not think I have seen it. It is in my backyard on the back corner of my lot. You cannot see it from the street. Then how is it affecting property values? The woman asked, looking confused. It sets a precedent, Robert chimed in. If we allow one person to build whatever they want, soon everyone will be putting up structures without approval. I got approval from the city, I said. I followed all the legal requirements. Not HOA requirements, Patricia said firmly. This discussion is over. The board's decision stands. Remove the tower or face the consequences. I left the meeting frustrated but not surprised. Patricia clearly had it out for me, and the rest of the board seemed content to let her run the show. 3 days later, I got a call from James Chen, an attorney with the Gilbert City Attorney's Office. Mr. Thornton, I understand the HOA is demanding you remove a structure that currently supports water district equipment, he said. That is correct. We cannot have that, Chen said. The equipment on your tower is part of a network that monitors water quality and pressure for about 3,000 homes in your area. Removing it would create a significant gap in our monitoring capabilities. I tried to explain that to the HOA, I said. They do not seem to care. Well, they are going to have to care, Chen said. I am going to send them a letter explaining that the tower is now considered part of city infrastructure and cannot be removed without approval from the water district. That should resolve the issue. You do not know Patricia Henderson, I said. Chen laughed. I have dealt with difficult HOA boards before. Trust me, once they understand the legal implications, they will back down. He was wrong. The city sent their letter. Patricia ignored it and sent me another letter increasing the daily fine to $250. According to her calculations, I now owed the HOA $7,000 in accumulated fines. I called Marcus again. This is getting out of hand. Yeah, I have been reading up on Arizona HOA law, Marcus said. The problem is that HOAs do have broad enforcement powers. They can put a lien on your house if you do not pay the fines. Even though the city says the tower is infrastructure, it is going to come down to who has jurisdiction. The HOA will argue their covenants give them authority over aesthetic modifications. The city will argue that infrastructure trumps HOA rules. You are caught in the middle. So what do I do? File a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They oversee HOAs. Also, you might want to consider getting your own attorney. This could end up in court. I spent that evening going through my finances, trying to figure out if I could afford a lawyer. The answer was not really, but I also could not afford to lose my house to an HOA lien. The next morning, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Is this Kenneth Thornton speaking?" "Mr. Thornton, my name is Zara Vasquez. I am an investigative reporter with the Arizona Republic. I received a tip about your situation with your HOA and the water district. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I hesitated. I had not thought about going to the media, but maybe public pressure could help where legal letters had failed. "Sure," I said. "What do you want to know?" We talked for about 45 minutes. I explained the whole situation, from submitting my initial request to the HOA, to getting city permits, to the water district installing their equipment. Zara asked smart questions and seemed genuinely interested in the story. "This is a great example of HOA overreach," she said. "And the public infrastructure angle makes it even more interesting. Can I come out and take some photos of the tower?" "Absolutely." Zara showed up that afternoon with a photographer. She was younger than I expected, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and an energy that suggested she loved her job. The photographer, an older guy named Dave, took shots of the tower from various angles, making sure to capture the water monitoring equipment. "This is really not visible from the street at all," Zara observed. "You would never know it was here unless you were specifically looking for it." "That is what I keep trying to tell Patricia," I said. "Patricia Henderson. She is the HOA president?" "Yeah. She lives a few houses over. I think she can see the top of the tower from her back windows, and that is enough to set her off." Zara made notes on her phone. "I am going to reach out to the HOA for comment. This should run sometime next week." After she left, I felt a small sense of hope. Maybe public scrutiny would force the HOA to back down. That hope was short-lived. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a crew in my backyard. A large truck was parked in my driveway, and 4 men in work clothes were setting up equipment near my tower. I got out of my car and ran into the backyard. "What the hell is going on?" One of the men, a stocky guy with a clipboard, turned to me. "We are here to remove the tower. HOA order." "You cannot do that," I said. "This is my property. Who authorized this?" "Lady named Patricia Henderson. She is the HOA president. She hired us to take it down." "Did she show you any kind of court order?" The guy looked uncomfortable. "She said she had the authority as HOA president." "She does not," I said firmly. "This is trespassing. You need to leave my property right now." The guy glanced at his crew, then back at me. "Look, man, we are just doing the job we were hired for." I pulled out my phone. "I am calling the police. If you are still here when they arrive, you will be arrested for trespassing and destruction of property." That got their attention. The guy with the clipboard held up his hands. Okay, we will leave. But you need to sort this out with the HOA. We are not getting in the middle of it." They packed up their equipment and left. I immediately called Marcus. "She tried to have the tower torn down without a court order," I said, my hands shaking with anger. "She hired a demolition crew to come onto my property." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That is illegal on several levels. Trespassing, destruction of property, possibly criminal mischief." "Did they actually damage anything?" "No, I got here before they could start. But Marcus, she is not going to stop. She is escalating." "Okay, here is what we are going to do. I am going to file for a restraining order to prevent the HOA from attempting to remove the tower. We will also send a cease and desist letter. And I think you should file a police report about today. Get it on record." I went to the Gilbert Police Department that evening and filed a report. The officer who took my statement seemed sympathetic, but warned me that civil disputes like this rarely resulted in criminal charges. "Best case scenario, it gives you documentation if this ends up in court," he said. "But unless they actually damage your property, there is not much we can do." The article in the Arizona Republic ran 3 days later. It was front page of the local section, with a big photo of my tower and the headline, "HOA demands removal of tower that monitors city water system." Zara had done her homework. The article laid out the entire situation, including quotes from the city attorney's office confirming that the tower supported critical infrastructure. She had also gotten a quote from Patricia, who had said, "The HOA has a responsibility to maintain community standards. Individual homeowners cannot be allowed to make modifications that negatively impact property values." The article made Patricia look unreasonable and petty, which was accurate. It also included comments from several of my neighbors, most of whom said they had no problem with the tower and thought the HOA was overreacting. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Republic's website crashed from traffic. My phone started ringing with calls from other news outlets wanting to cover the story. Local TV stations showed up at my house, asking for interviews. And the HOA went silent. For about a week, I heard nothing from Patricia or the board. No letters, no calls, no attempted tower removals. I started to think maybe the media attention had scared them off. Then I got a call from James Chen at the city attorney's office. "Kenneth, we have a problem," he said. "The HOA has filed a lawsuit against the city, arguing that we violated their authority by installing equipment on your tower without their permission. Can they do that? They can file the lawsuit. Whether they will win is another question, but it complicates things. The city is going to have to defend the suit, which means this is going to drag out for a while. What does that mean for me? It means do not remove the tower. We need it to stay in place while this gets sorted out. But it also means the HOA is probably going to keep coming after you." He was right. 2 days later, I received notice that the HOA had put a lien on my house for unpaid fines, which they now claimed totaled $18,000. I met with Marcus and another attorney he had brought in, a woman named Rebecca Torres who specialized in real estate law. "This lien is probably not enforceable," Rebecca said, reviewing the documents, "but fighting it is going to require going to court. The good news is that you have a strong case. The bad news is that it is going to be expensive and time-consuming." "How expensive?" "Legal fees could run anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000, depending on how hard the HOA fights." I felt sick. I do not have that kind of money. "There might be another option," Rebecca said. "The city has a vested interest in keeping the tower in place. They might be willing to provide legal support or even intervene in the case." "I will call Chen," I said. When I reached James Chen, he listened to the situation and promised to discuss it with his supervisors. 2 days later, he called back with good news. "The city is going to file a motion to intervene in the case," he said. "We are also going to argue that the HOA's actions constitute interference with municipal operations. And here is the really good part. We are going to ask the court to sanction the HOA for their behavior." What does that mean? If the judge agrees with us, the HOA could be ordered to pay attorneys' fees and possibly face fines for their conduct. It is a way to discourage this kind of harassment. Things moved slowly after that. Court dates were set and then postponed. Lawyers filed motions and counter-motions. The HOA hired a bigger law firm out of Phoenix, clearly prepared to fight this to the bitter end. Meanwhile, my story had gone viral. National news outlets picked it up. I did interviews with CNN and Fox News. Someone started a GoFundMe to help with my legal expenses, which raised over $40,000 in 3 weeks. People from all over the country sent messages of support, many of them sharing their own HOA horror stories. The attention seemed to embolden Patricia. At a heated HOA meeting that I did not attend, but heard about from neighbors, she had doubled down, insisting that the board had to maintain control over the community no matter what the media said. But cracks were forming in the HOA's united front. Robert, one of the board members who had originally backed Patricia, resigned citing personal reasons. The treasurer, a quiet woman named Deanne, started asking questions about how much money the HOA was spending on legal fees. 6 months after this whole mess started, we finally got a court date. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the Maricopa County Superior Court in downtown Phoenix. I took the day off work and met Marcus and Rebecca at the courthouse. James Chen was there representing the city, along with another attorney from the Water District. On the other side of the courtroom, Patricia sat with her legal team. 3 lawyers in expensive suits who looked like they charged $1,000 an hour. The judge, a woman named Judith Martinez, listened to both sides present their arguments. The HOA's lawyers argued that covenants and restrictions were fundamental to property rights, and that allowing homeowners to ignore HOA rules would undermine the entire system of planned communities. Rebecca countered that, while HOA rules were generally enforceable, they could not override municipal infrastructure needs. She pointed out that the tower served thousands of residents, and that removing it would cost the city over $100,000 to replace with an alternative system. James Chen went further. He argued that the HOA's conduct had been egregious and harassing, pointing to the attempted unauthorized removal of the tower and the escalating fines designed to force compliance rather than resolve the dispute reasonably. Judge Martinez asked tough questions of both sides. When Patricia's lead attorney tried to argue that aesthetic concerns justified the HOA's position, the judge interrupted him. "Counselor, I have seen the photographs. This tower is barely visible from the street and serves a clear public purpose. Help me understand why your client is pursuing this matter so aggressively." The attorney fumbled for a response, eventually falling back on the importance of HOA authority. After 2 hours of arguments, Judge Martinez called a recess to review the materials. We waited in the hallway, and I tried not to think about what would happen if I lost. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Martinez delivered her ruling. "I find that the defendant, Mr. Thornton, acted in good faith and followed all applicable city regulations in constructing his tower. While HOA covenants generally provide for aesthetic control over properties, that authority cannot extend to preventing installation of municipal infrastructure. The city has demonstrated a legitimate need for the monitoring equipment on Mr. Thornton's tower, and the HOA has failed to show that the tower creates any genuine harm to the community." I felt my chest loosen with relief. "Furthermore," Judge Martinez continued, "I find that the HOA's conduct in this matter has been unreasonable and harassing. The accumulation of excessive fines, the attempted unauthorized removal of the tower, and the filing of a legally questionable lien all constitute an abuse of the HOA's authority. Accordingly, I am ordering the HOA to remove the lien on Mr. Thornton's property, cease all enforcement actions related to the tower, and pay Mr. Thornton's reasonable attorney's fees. I am also ordering the HOA to pay the city's legal costs related to defending this matter." Patricia's face had gone white. Her lawyers looked stunned. "Additionally," the judge said, "I am referring this matter to the Arizona Department of Real Estate for investigation into whether the HOA board's conduct warrants disciplinary action. This case represents precisely the kind of HOA overreach that damages homeowner rights and public trust in community associations." The judge banged her gavel and it was over. Outside the courthouse, I shook hands with Marcus, Rebecca, and James Chen. "Thank you," I said. "All of you. I could not have done this without your help. You stood up for yourself when a lot of people would have just given in," Rebecca said. "That takes courage." James Chen grinned. "And the city gets to keep its monitoring station without having to spend a fortune relocating it. Everybody wins." Except the HOA. That evening I got a call from Zara Vasquez. "I heard about the ruling. Congratulations. I would love to do a follow-up article." "Absolutely," I said. "I want people to know how this ended." Her article ran 2 days later with another big headline. "Judge rules against HOA in water tower case, orders sanctions." The response from the community was swift and decisive. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended along with about 50 other homeowners, there was a motion to recall the entire board. Patricia tried to defend her actions, insisting she had been protecting property values, but homeowners were not having it. "You cost us tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees fighting a battle you could not win," one man shouted. over a tower that none of us even knew existed until you made it an issue. You made our entire neighborhood look ridiculous on national news," another woman added. My relatives in Ohio were calling me asking what the hell was going on. The recall motion passed with only 3 dissenting votes. Patricia and the other board members were out, but the story was not quite over. A month later, I got a call from an investigator with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They wanted to interview me as part of their investigation into the HOA's conduct. We take complaints about HOA abuse very seriously. The investigator, a man named David Park, told me. Based on what we have seen so far, there are potential violations of several state statutes governing HOA operations. I told him everything, providing copies of all the letters, legal documents, and correspondence I had accumulated over the past 8 months. 2 months after that, the Department of Real Estate issued their findings. They determined that the Meadowbrook Hills HOA Board had violated multiple provisions of Arizona law, including failing to properly consider modification requests, imposing excessive fines without proper notice, and attempting to take enforcement actions beyond their authority. The department ordered the HOA to implement new policies and procedures, undergo governance training, and submit to oversight for a period of 2 years. Patricia Henderson was personally barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 5 years. The fines and sanctions the department imposed cost the HOA an additional $30,000, which led to a special assessment of about $200 per homeowner to cover the costs. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia was furious and blamed me for everything. Apparently, she was telling anyone who would listen that I had destroyed the HOA and hurt property values with my vindictive pursuit of the matter. Most people in the neighborhood did not see it that way. In fact, the new board that was elected made a point of reaching out to me. The new president, a retired engineer named Frank Morrison, came by my house one evening. "Kenneth, I want to apologize on behalf of the HOA," he said. "What happened to you was wrong. The previous board lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to do, which is serve the community, not act like petty tyrants." "I appreciate that," I said. "We are implementing some new policies," Frank continued. "All modification requests will now be reviewed within 30 days, with written explanations for any denials. We are also establishing an appeals process and bringing in a neutral mediator for disputes. We want to make sure nothing like this happens again." "That sounds good," I said. Frank looked up at my tower. "You know, I have been thinking about getting into ham radio myself. Would you be willing to show me your setup sometime?" I smiled. "Sure, come by whenever you want." Over the following months, things settled into a new normal. My tower stayed up, the water district's monitoring equipment continued to function, and the HOA focused on actual community issues like maintaining the common areas and organizing neighborhood events. I ran into Patricia once, at the grocery store. She saw me, turned pale, and quickly walked in the other direction. I did not try to talk to her. There was nothing left to say. The legal bills ended up being covered by the GoFundMe donations, with money left over that I donated to a nonprofit that helps homeowners fight HOA disputes. I also started volunteering with that organization, sharing my story and offering advice to others facing similar situations. One thing that surprised me was how many people reached out after my story went public. I received hundreds of emails and messages from homeowners across the country who had their own HOA nightmare stories. Some of them were even worse than mine. People who had been fined thousands of dollars for having the wrong color mailbox, or who had liens placed on their homes for planting unapproved flowers. or who had been harassed for months over minor violations that other homeowners were allowed to get away with. It made me realize that my situation, while frustrating and expensive, was part of a much larger problem with how HOAs operate in America. Too often, they become little fiefdoms run by people who enjoy wielding power over their neighbors. And because HOAs operate with limited oversight and broad enforcement powers, homeowners can find themselves trapped in situations where fighting back costs more than giving in. I started writing about these issues on a blog, documenting not just my own case, but the broader problems with HOA governance. The blog gained a following, and I was invited to speak at a few homeowner advocacy events. At one of these events in Scottsdale, I met a state legislator who was interested in HOA reform. We had a long conversation about potential changes to Arizona law that could provide better protections for homeowners while still allowing HOAs to function effectively. The problem is that HOAs were originally created to maintain common areas and handle shared expenses, the legislator explained. But over time, they have evolved into quasi-governmental entities with enforcement powers that would make a zoning board jealous. We need to rein that in without completely dismantling the HOA system. What kind of reforms are you thinking about? I asked. Mandatory review periods for modification requests, caps on fines, requirements for mediation before legal action, better transparency around budgets and decision-making. Things that force HOAs to act reasonably and give homeowners more recourse when things go wrong. That would have made a huge difference in my case, I said. The legislator nodded. Would you be willing to testify if we introduce a reform bill? Absolutely. That conversation led to me spending time at the state capitol, talking to lawmakers and sharing my story. A reform bill was introduced in the next legislative session, with provisions that addressed many of the issues I had encountered. The bill faced opposition from HOA management companies and some real estate interests, but it had strong support from homeowner advocacy groups. The bill passed, though in a watered-down form that did not include all the reforms advocates had hoped for. Still, it was progress. Arizona now required HOAs to respond to modification requests within 45 days, placed limits on how quickly fines could escalate, and created a state ombudsman position to handle homeowner complaints. Meanwhile, back in Meadowbrook Hills, life went on. The new HOA board proved to be far more reasonable than the old one. They approved several modification requests that had been pending for months, including one from my neighbor who wanted to install solar panels. The community even organized a neighborhood party, something that had not happened in years. It was held in the common area park, with barbecue grills and picnic tables set up. Families came out, kids ran around playing, and for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt like an actual community rather than a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. Frank Morrison gave a short speech, talking about the importance of neighbors looking out for each other and working together to make Meadowbrook Hills a great place to live. He did not mention Patricia or the previous board by name, but everyone knew what he was referring to when he talked about learning from past mistakes. I brought my portable ham radio to the party and set up a demonstration station. Several people stopped by to ask questions, and a few expressed interest in getting their own licenses. I ended up organizing an informal class, meeting at my house once a week to help people study for the licensing exam. One of my students was a teenager named Alex who lived a few streets over. He was fascinated by the technology and quickly absorbed everything I taught him. When he passed his exam and got his call sign, His parents threw him a small party and invited me to attend. "You have given Alex something really special," his mom told me. "He has been struggling to find things he is passionate about, and this has really sparked something in him." "He is a natural," I said. "He will go far with it if he sticks with it." Looking at Alex's excitement reminded me of why I had gotten into ham radio in the first place. It was not about the tower or the equipment or even the technical challenges. It was about connecting with people, being part of a community that spanned the globe, and having the ability to help during emergencies. The tower that had caused so much trouble was, in the end, just a tool. But it had become a symbol of something larger. The fight to maintain individual rights against unreasonable authority, the importance of infrastructure that serves the public good, and the need for communities to work together rather than turn on each other. About a year after the court ruling, I got an email from James Chen at the city attorney's office. The water district wanted to expand its monitoring network and was looking for additional locations to install equipment. Would I be willing to talk to some of my neighbors about potentially hosting monitoring stations? I reached out to Frank Morrison, and we organized a meeting where someone from the water district could explain what they needed and what the benefits would be. 8 homeowners showed up, and 4 of them expressed interest in hosting equipment. The water district ended up installing monitoring stations at 3 additional locations in Meadowbrook Hills, creating a more robust network that improved water quality tracking throughout the area. Each homeowner received a small monthly payment from the city for hosting the equipment, which helped offset their HOA fees. Patricia Henderson eventually moved out of Meadowbrook Hills. I heard she bought a house in a different subdivision in Queen Creek. I felt a small twinge of sympathy for her new neighbors, but mostly felt relief that she was gone. The property she had lived in was purchased by a young couple with 2 small children. They were friendly and outgoing, and they quickly became active in neighborhood activities. The husband, whose name was Tom, came by one evening to introduce himself. "I heard about what happened with the previous HOA board," he said. "That is actually part of why we were comfortable buying here. The fact that the community stood up and made changes showed us this is a place where people care about doing things right." "I am glad it worked out that way," I said. "Also," Tom added with a grin, "my wife thinks it is cool that you have a ham radio setup. She is into emergency preparedness, and she wants to learn more about how ham radio can be used in disaster situations." I ended up teaching Tom's wife, Jessica, along with several other neighbors. We formed a small emergency communications group for the neighborhood, with a plan for how we would communicate if cell towers went down during a major emergency. That plan was put to the test sooner than we expected. A severe monsoon storm hit the Phoenix area in late July, with winds over 70 miles per hour and heavy rain that caused flash flooding. Power went out across large sections of Gilbert, and cell towers were overwhelmed with traffic. Our little ham radio network stayed operational. I coordinated with the county emergency management office, relaying information about which roads were flooded and where people needed assistance. Jessica operated a station from her house. Tom ran a mobile setup in his truck to check on elderly neighbors, and several other people helped relay messages. We were not the only ham radio operators active during the storm, but we were able to provide hyperlocal information about our specific area that was valuable to emergency responders. When power and cell service were restored 2 days later, we received commendations from the county emergency manager for our assistance. The experience reinforced for me why fighting for my tower had been worth it. Yes, it had been expensive and stressful and had consumed months of my life. But the tower was not just about me. It served a real purpose, both for the water district and for emergency communications. Taking it down would have been a victory for petty authoritarianism over common sense and public benefit. I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. How many times do people give in to unreasonable demands just because fighting back seems too hard or too expensive? How many battles are lost by default because standing up requires more energy than most people have to spare? I had been lucky in many ways. I had supportive neighbors, help from the city, and enough media attention that the HOA could not quietly crush me through legal fees and harassment. A lot of people facing similar situations do not have those advantages. They fight alone, often losing everything in the process. That knowledge motivated me to stay involved in HOA reform efforts. I continued working with the nonprofit organization that helped homeowners, serving on their advisory board and sharing my expertise. I testified before legislative committees on 2 more occasions as additional reform bills were introduced. Not all of those bills passed. The HOA industry has powerful lobbyists who fight against meaningful reforms, arguing that restrictions on HOA authority will lead to chaos and declining property values. They paint a picture of neighborhoods overrun with junked cars and falling down houses if HOAs cannot strictly enforce their rules. But that is a false choice. No one is arguing that HOAs should have no enforcement power. The question is how much power they should have, and what safeguards should exist to prevent abuse. My case showed what happens when an HOA operates without meaningful oversight. A vindictive board president can make a homeowner's life miserable over a personal grudge, costing everyone involved thousands of dollars and countless hours of stress. 2 years after the court ruling, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who was making a film about HOA disputes in America. She wanted to feature my story as one of several case studies. We spent a day filming interviews at my house, with shots of the tower and the surrounding neighborhood. The filmmaker, whose name was Rachel, asked thoughtful questions about how the experience had affected me and what I had learned from it. "You have any regrets?" she asked. "Knowing what you know now, would you still have built the tower?" I thought about that for a moment. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely. The tower serves a purpose. It helps monitor water quality for thousands of people, and it provides critical communications capability during emergencies. Those are real benefits, and fighting for it, as hard as that was, helped bring attention to problems with how HOAs operate. Maybe that will lead to changes that help other people down the road." What would you say to someone who is facing a similar situation with their HOA? Document everything. Keep copies of all correspondence, take photos and videos, get everything in writing, and do not be afraid to ask for help. There are organizations that support homeowners, and sometimes the media can be an ally. Most importantly, know your rights. HOAs have power, but that power is not unlimited. They cannot violate state law, and they cannot interfere with legitimate municipal functions. The documentary premiered at a film festival in Austin and was later picked up by a streaming service. It got positive reviews and sparked renewed conversations about HOA reform. I did a few interviews when it came out, and my inbox filled up again with messages from people sharing their own stories. One message that stuck with me came from a woman in Florida who was fighting her HOA over a wheelchair ramp she had installed for her disabled son. The HOA claimed the ramp violated their architectural standards and was demanding she remove it. She had seen the documentary and wanted advice. I connected her with disability rights attorneys and homeowner advocacy groups. Her case eventually settled, with the HOA agreeing to allow the ramp and pay her legal fees. But it should never have been a fight in the first place. The idea that an HOA would try to force a disabled child to go without necessary accommodation was grotesque. Yet it happened, because the people running the HOA cared more about appearance than about people. These stories reinforced my belief that HOA reform was not just about property rights or legal technicalities. It was about basic human decency and the kind of communities we want to live in. Do we want neighborhoods where people help each other and work together? Or do we want places where petty rules are enforced by busybodies who get off on wielding power over their neighbors? I knew which kind of community I wanted, and I was grateful that Meadowbrook Hills had moved in that direction after the old board was removed. 3 years after everything started, I was contacted by the Arizona Republic again. They were doing a retrospective on my case and wanted to know how things had turned out. Zara Vasquez, who had written the original articles, came by to interview me. She had been promoted to a senior reporting position but still occasionally worked on investigative pieces that interested her. So, was it worth it? She asked, echoing the question Rachel had posed for the documentary. Yes, I said without hesitation. Not just for me, but for what it represented. Standing up to unreasonable authority, protecting public infrastructure, showing that individuals can fight back against institutional power and win. Those are important principles. Your case helped change Arizona law, Zara pointed out. The reforms that passed included provisions directly inspired by what happened to you. I am proud of that, I said, but there is still a long way to go. HOA abuse is still a massive problem across the country. Every week I hear from someone dealing with something similar. What keeps you involved in this issue? Zara asked. You could have just moved on with your life after you won. I looked up at my tower, which was still standing in the corner of my yard, still supporting water monitoring equipment and my ham radio antennas. Because it matters, I said. People's homes are the biggest investment most of them will ever make. Having that threatened by an HOA that is more interested in control than in serving the community is wrong. If I can help prevent that from happening to others, even in small ways, then it is worth the effort. The retrospective article ran on the anniversary of the original story. It included updates on the legislative reforms, information about the HOA advocacy work I had been doing, and comments from neighbors about how the community had changed since the old board was removed. Frank Morrison was quoted saying, "What happened with Kenneth's Tower was a wake-up call for our community. It made us realize we had lost sight of what was important. Now, we focus on building community rather than enforcing rules for the sake of enforcing rules." The article also noted that Patricia Henderson had declined to comment, which did not surprise me. Life continued to move forward. I got a promotion at work, leading a team of engineers on a major project. Alex, the teenager I had helped get into ham radio, went off to college to study electrical engineering. Jessica and Tom had another baby, and their family became fixtures at neighborhood gatherings. The tower stood through monsoon storms and blazing summer heat, quietly doing its job of monitoring water pressure and supporting emergency communications. It was just a piece of galvanized steel with some equipment attached, but it had become something more than that. It was a reminder that ordinary people can stand up to unreasonable authority and win. That infrastructure serving the public good matters, and that communities are strongest when they work together rather than tearing each other apart. Sometimes I would stand in my backyard in the evening, looking up at the tower with the sun setting behind it, and think about everything that had happened. The stress, the legal battles, the media attention, the reform efforts that followed. It had been exhausting, but it had also been worth it. And if Patricia Henderson was somewhere thinking about how I had ruined her HOA and destroyed her authority, well, I could live with that. Because the HOA was not hers to begin with. It belonged to all of us, and it was supposed to serve the community, not the ego of whoever happened to be in charge. The tower remained standing, serving its purpose, a testament to the idea that doing the right thing is worth fighting for, even when the fight is hard. And in the end, that was all that mattered.